Senator Gregg, Republican of New Hampshire, not a fan of that bill. He joins us now from D.C. You're a former governor, and yet you say this extra aid to states in the middle of an economic downturn is not a good thing. Why not?
Because we didn't pay for it properly. It's going to cost add $22 billion to the deficit next year. We don't have $22 billion to add to the deficit. Now, it scores over 10 years because they've got some back-end tax revenues here that they're claiming on the 5th through the 10th year. It scores as a zero, but we know when you get out there that something else will have happened by then. And we know what will happen next year is they're going to add $22 billion of new deficit, more debt. And really, that's not a good way to manage your house. And we've got enough problems around this city already without adding another $22 billion to our deficit and our debt next year.
Well, let's talk about the Bush tax cuts, because obviously that is sort of the battle du jour in D.C. Secretary Geithner's talking about them. You, of course, support extending all of those cuts for now. But why not, in the face of deficits, let them expire for the wealthiest top two brackets? They're not paid for.
Because that's where because the energy, well, first off, it's not our money. I mean, it's a little different. When the federal government decides to borrow money from China and then send it to the states, that's a little different. You know, I mean, that's spending. But when you're taking money from the American taxpayer, which is their money they've earned, hard-earned money, that's different. And I don't think that we want to raise taxes in the middle of a recession. I don't think it's going to help this economy at all to do that. I think it will cause a further slowdown and probably reduce revenues even further because of the economic dampening effect it'll have on overall economic activity.
And yet, we're talking about an income bracket that traditionally saves instead of spends.
Well, I don't know that that's absolutely true, but we're talking about an income bracket which is mostly small business, which is where you get your expansion in an economy. Economies don't expand because big businesses go out and start to hire. We're obviously seeing that today, where big businesses, large businesses in this country have very strong balance sheets. It's the first person on Main Street who's making money and functioning as a subchapter S corporation that decides to add a few more employees. That's where you get your expansion. And it's that person that, instead of being able to add a few more employees, is going to have to send more money here to Washington to be spent on things that probably they're not actually that excited about.
Do you know, Senator Gregg, it's such a huge bracket. I mean, it's obviously, there's a big difference between someone making $250,000 a year and trying to raise a family here in New York. They're clearly going to spend every dollar that they get, and somebody making $10 million. Why not do something new, something revolutionary? I mean, why can't you decrease the burden on someone who would be in New York, really middle class, and give the tax increases to those people making $10 million a year, wherever they may be?
Because we're not a socialist nation. I just don't happen to believe that the way you create wealth in the country is by taxing the productive side of the economy and moving it to the non-productive side of the economy in a disproportionate way. Yes, there has to be a fair tax burden, and in fact, I put forward a proposal. It's called the Gregg bill. It's a bipartisan proposal to totally overhaul our tax laws, take us to 3 rates. The top rate would be 35%. It would reduce taxes for almost all Americans, take the corporate rate from 35% to 24%, so we'd have more capital incentive. It's a really positive piece of legislation. It does it by eliminating a lot of the deductions and exemptions, which cause the playing field to be unlevel. And it's the first major overhaul in the tax area since the Reagan-Bradley tax reform actions of 1986. And Rod Wyden and I think it's the way you should go to deal with tax policy.
Well, that's, of course, something that we heard from your Democratic counterpart. Kent Conrad was talking about this yesterday, a more revolutionary overhaul of the tax code. Senator, we'd like to ask you to stick with us for just 2 more minutes. We're going to come back, talk more about this right after the break. Hang on just a second. We're going to be coming back with more with Senator Gregg, ranking Republican on the Budget Committee. All right, let's continue our conversation with New Hampshire Senator Gregg, and avid Red Sox fan on the Senate Budget Committee. We were getting into this in the break. We were talking about a VAT tax. Why not talk about taking a much more radical approach to taxation?
Well, I think the Gregg bill is a radical approach to taxation, and it lives within the boundaries of what is doable in the area of tax reform. The problem with VAT tax is numerous. Conceptually, it probably makes sense, but in theory, it makes sense, but in practice, it would make no sense at all. And the reason is this. We've got in this country a spending problem. The size of the federal government has gone from 20% of GDP up to 24% of GDP in the last 2 years. It's headed towards 28% of GDP. There are a lot of people on the other side of the aisle who say, well, we can just cover that with new taxes, and the new tax they're looking at is the VAT tax. They're not talking about replacing the income tax. They're talking about layering a national sales tax, which is what a VAT tax is, on top of the income tax. And I'll tell you something, I've been in government for a number of years, and I've noticed this about government. All government moves to the left. Government always grows. Think of it as a train on a railroad track. It's constantly moving to the left. And how fast it goes to the left, how fast it grows, depends on how many engines are on that train. And the engines are the revenue sources. And if you put the engine of a VAT tax on the train of government, you're going to see government explode in size. The only way you can control the rate of growth of government, or one of the primary ways to control the rate of growth of government, is to control its revenues so that there is not an incentive to overspend. Unfortunately, in the last couple of years, we've seen this massive expansion in debt. We're seeing deficits at $1.4 trillion, so that hasn't had much control. But at some point, the controls will kick in, and we'll have to bring down that spending. But if you put in place a VAT tax, you'll never have to bring down that spending, and government will take a larger and larger part of the economy and make us a less and less productive country and reduce our standard of living as a nation.
Senator Gregg, why not, though, take a really radical approach? Yesterday, I don't know if it was Mitch McConnell or Kent Conrad, and I think that's a fantastic sign, who said this, but they said the tax code is way too complex. And people from the fair tax will say you could completely replace an income tax with a VAT tax, and then instead of having a tax on production, you could tax consumption. You don't penalize people for doing better, and you end the Washington game of paying lobbyists for loopholes. I mean, wouldn't that be a good thing?
In theory, that's a great idea. The only problem is in practice it doesn't happen that way. I come from New Hampshire. All the states around New Hampshire started out with either a sales or an income tax. And every one of those states, all the other New England states, then put in place the opposite, either income tax or sales tax, to complement their sales or income tax. And they all did it with one representation, that the other tax that was in place would go down. And it hasn't happened. All those taxes have continued to go up. New Hampshire has remained without a sales or income tax, and that's the best approach to governing. Control the rate of revenue so you control the growth of government.
Senator, we're running out of time, but I got to ask you, yes or no, do you think the Bush tax cuts, those top two, get extended?
Good question. I hope they do, and I think it would be extremely counterproductive and cause this economy to even slow down further if they aren't. But there are a lot of folks who want to see taxes raised around here, so they're not on my side of the aisle, but on the other side of the aisle. So I can't answer that question since the Democrats have supermajorities in the House and the Senate. All they have to do is stop the tax increase, the extension of the tax cuts. And if they stop them, then the taxes go up. So they're holding a lot of cards, and they may be able to force taxes up here, which would be a real mistake.
All right. Senator Gregg, thank you very much. Obviously a battle that we're going to be watching.
Thanks,